a lot of things were said in this William Lane Craig, Alex O'Connor conversation that I thought were fascinating. I mean, the topic, particularly about the biblical genocide, is one that is difficult to grapple with. So I'm glad you're with me as we cover not just what was said, but actually what was missed. I thought both William Lane Craig and Alex missed a lot when it comes to this very important conversation. But I also missed a lot. And so I'm glad you're with me. Let's get into it.
Is specifically about the accusation that this is apology for genocide. I've heard that when people ask you about this and they say the genocide of the Canaanites, you don't like that description, to put it lightly, of what happened here. But I'll tell you why I think it might be a suitable descriptor here. Okay, because the language of the Hebrew Bible is quite extreme in saying that we should be destroying them completely and leaving nothing alive that breathes. Now, you have pointed out that God actually does say to drive them out. And right. It does seem that after these military campaigns, there are still Canaanites who are alive. But yet it does seem to me that, for instance, on the issue of driving out, if we look first at Deuteronomy, where God says, however, in the cities of the nations the Lord your God is giving to you as an inheritance, do not leave alive anything that breathes. Completely destroy them. And then it lists a number of peoples, including the Canaanites, as the Lord your God has commanded you. Otherwise, they teach you to follow detestable things, and so on. It says, do not leave alive anything that breathes. Destroy them completely. Now, it may be that the Israelites failed to do so, but it seems like the commandment is clear.
All right. So this is an important part of the conversation, and I don't think Alex really he just doesn't. It's like this. If you're gonna say that this is one of the reasons I can't believe, in the God of the Bible, then and he quotes the passage, which is good, but he begins in the middle of the passage, and I covered this in another podcast, so I won't go over everything exactly the same, but if you go up to Deuteronomy 20:10, there is a command that God gives to make peace. Now, this command, and this is what I missed in the last video, this command there's nuance here when it comes to the cities that are near you and the cities that are far away from you. And so it seems that God has marked out particular cities where the conquest needs to be very specific in how they drive out the people, and this is what Alex is quoting, not leave alive anything that breathes. So there's this very specific command that seems really, really harsh. It is harsh. We're talking about war here, but are we talking about genocide? The interesting thing for me here, so there's two parts, and we'll get to the nuance here of like the cities that are near from you, the cities that are far. Why are there certain cities that need to be handled with particular focus as it pertains to the conquest of that city? Now, is it the people? Yeah, I mean, he's going to list these people, but the people in the city seem to be mixed up. And when we get to the DeYoung clip about this, which I thought was really good, he'll give us some nuance about what it means to be a Canaanite and a Hittite, what it means to live in these cities. And actually what it comes down to for me is there are two other cities that we can compare. One is Nineveh. And Jonah was sent to Nineveh to prophesy against the city so that the city would repent. And of course, it's a funny passage because Jonah doesn't really want to do that. And God says this, should I not have compassion on Nineveh, the great city in which there are more than 120 persons who do not know the difference between their right hand and their left? And this passage is an interesting one for me because is it basically telling us that there are innocent young people in the city of Nineveh that God is wanting to spare? This is a continual point that is brought up between Alex and William Lane Craig. Alex seems very concerned about innocent people in these cities, particularly young people. Okay, so he's very pro-life in this moment, which is certainly a Christian virtue, and I champion that. We should be pro-life, and so that's why this passage is is a hard one for us. But Jonah, this passage in Jonah definitely seems to indicate God having compassion on young people, on persons who do not know the difference between their right hand and their left. So there's another passage where this is not the case, and this has to do with Sodom and Gomorrah. Before they lay down, the men of the city, there's these sort of like angels visiting the city. They're visiting Lot. It's a horrible place. And the men of Sodom surrounded the house, both young and old, and all the people from every quarter. This passage seems to indicate for us that the innocence is gone. All the people from every quarter, literally everyone in this city, is united in their, and it's, well, you can read Genesis 19, and you can see what's going on in this city. It's similar to William Lane Craig's point about the people living in Canaan. He keeps going back to the fact that they're just like evil, evil people, which is like a good point to make, but it's not the only point to make. These are evil people, but the evil in this city has crept down into the youth, into the ones who should be innocent. And so as we come back to what Alex's point is, there seems to be cities that God wants Israel to make peace with, where, like Nineveh, there's innocence still within the city, or there's innocence still within the people of that city. And yet there are other cities where that innocence is gone. And you should not leave alive any that breathe, because the evil has crept in, so it's so much a part of everyday life that even young people are participating in the evil of the city or in the evil of these people. And so that's the first thing. And it is something that I missed, because I made a big point about the fact that God gives this command earlier on in Deuteronomy, which to me sets the context for this conquest. If there are people who are willing to make peace with you, make peace with them. If there are people who are not willing to make peace, but they want to war against you, then war against those people. And in the previous podcast, I brought up the hardening of Pharaoh's heart. If you look at that passage, what it seems to indicate is that God hardens who will be hardened, because both Pharaoh hardened his heart and God hardened Pharaoh's heart. And it seems like a similar thing is going on in the conquest of Canaan, that those people who want to war against Israel should then go to war with them. But again, God gave a lot of opportunity for people to surrender the land to Israel, whom God had given the land to. And again, go back to the other podcast and listen to this, but it's God's land. It's not the Canaanites' land. It's not even the land of the Hebrew people. It's God's land, and he can give it to whoever he wants. And then we got to play he sets the rules of this game that we're playing. And so I really did want to point out that there is a stipulation here: near cities that are near and cities that are far. And so I thought that this clip from Father DeYoung was actually really helpful here when it comes to this conversation. I will leave a link to this whole video, very much worth your time to watch this. But he's going to point out something to us about the nature of these cities and what it meant to be the people of those cities. And then we're going to look at a passage where Jesus actually encounters a Canaanite woman, and I think that that's going to bring kind of the whole story completely around it. So I wonder also if you could play with the idea of nearness and far awayness. Now, I don't think that the passage in Deuteronomy is really talking about people who are near to God and people who are far away from God, but it does fit within the idea of those who have hardened their hearts against God and want to practice their pagan rituals which were horrible and evil. And again, it's I don't know the cognitive dissonance here because Alex is really concerned about the young people being mistreated by the nation of Israel during the conquest, and the disabled people and all the quote unquote innocent people. And yet he doesn't really consider what those people how those people would have been treated under the Canaanite pagan practices. So yes, in some ways, it seems like Israel is coming in. They're doing this conquest. They're taking slaves, but they're taking those slaves out of paganism and into the nation of Israel, where they would have rights. And in that pagan nation, it is dark. I mean, there is a lot of darkness there. So you can think of the innocent children. You can think of the women that were being abused and brutalized during that time. And it's, again, not easy because we're talking about war, but is it possible that being a slave, and that term, you can go back to the other podcast, but that term is sort of misunderstood by modern people, being a slave in Israel as in a way being a way of rescuing innocent people from these pagan nations. Let me know what you think. I really, seriously.
And outside of those brackets, we're just as materialist as Christopher Hitchens or Richard Dawkins. I won't go into it. I don't know how consistent they actually were, but we look at things the same way. We look at things as if we were a scientific atheist, unless they're inside those religion brackets, religion category. And that even includes then when we go to read the Old Testament. So we read the book of Joshua, and this is a story about one ethnic group committing genocide against some other ethnic groups because God told them to. Right? That's the read. And so even the problem is addressed from that perspective. And so that sort of doubly problematizes the whole thing, because an atheist comes and presents Joshua that way. And rather than the Christian who's responding, questioning that portrayal of what's happening, substituting a different cosmology within which these events are taking place, he accepts that reading and then finds himself in the position of trying to defend genocide. Well, no, here's why genocide was okay in this instance.
And that's basically what William Lane Craig found himself. He found himself in that position with Alex, saying, having to sort of, in a way, do a lot of what I thought was gymnastics to defend, quote unquote, genocide, rather than reading the text for what the text is. And this is what I would encourage Alex, anybody who's interested in this subject, to, if you're going to base your beliefs off Scripture, which I think you should read it carefully. And if you're going to use that Scripture as a pretext for disbelieving in God, which I think is a very serious thing, then make sure you're reading the text carefully. And actually, I think that's where William Lane Craig made a huge mistake. Once Alex brought up the text, you should just go and read it. You should go and look at the context of that passage. And you might have to read it in the entire context of the whole Bible, which kind of leaves me with a question for Alex O'Connor. I wonder about this, because he's quoting these passages as though they're historical. He basically looks at these passages and says, well, this is really what happened, and what happened is so horrible, I can't believe in your God. But if you're going to look at these passages as though they're historically reliable, what then do you do of the passage of Jesus' resurrection? Because again, we're reading this in its context. We're reading the whole Bible. The Bible helps us interpret the Bible. Passages interpret one another. And although you can look at a particular passage or a particular book of the Bible, you also have to look at the whole Bible and realize that it's giving you a cosmology, a picture of the cosmos, a picture of reality that is not the same as the scientific atheist approach that Alex is taking, and unfortunately that William Lane Craig accepts. It's painting a totally different, not totally different, but it's painting a different picture of reality, a more clear picture of what's actually going on during this conquest, and that's what Stephen DeYoung gets to here.
So then you get into the whole Euthyphro debate about God. Is it the fact that God commanded it that makes this one okay? Are you saying it's good in general? Are you saying, and we shouldn't dismiss the fact that some of those bad answers have had incredible historical consequences. So we have to take a few steps back and question those basic presuppositions about the world, right? So is what we're talking about, first of all, in Joshua, are we talking about ethnicities, right? The concept of an ethnicity as it exists today, the concept of DNA, right, didn't exist. And what made people part of a certain people group, whether it was Israel or whether it was one of these Canaanite groups that are called giant clans in the Old Testament, what made someone part of those groups was determined ritually. So what made you an Israelite was not a certain ethnicity, was not sort of you traced your DNA back to Abraham somehow without science. It was that you had been circumcised, if you were male, or you were married to or the daughter of a circumcised male, and you ate the Passover. Because doing those things put you into a relationship with the Israelite community and with God, with the God of Israel. Right? And so now there's this community includes God. You are now a part of it. Right? And those relationships between you and God and you and the rest of the community are part of that order of justice. This is part of that cosmology. And likewise with these giant clans, they had rituals of initiation, which were sexual in nature. And they participated in acts of human sacrifice, we're told in the sources, these giant groups. So that's what made an Amalekite, so they participated in these rituals that brought them into communion with each other and into communion with the demonic powers who were involved in those rituals, who were at the other end of those rituals. What we have here is primarily a spiritual warfare, but that's being fought by humans. That's taking place between humans. So the Amalekites, who are one of these giant clans, attempted to exterminate the Israelites while they were at the base of Mount Sinai. And this is that passage about them daring to lay a hand upon the throne of God while he was there at Sinai with Moses. And so the war was going both ways. But what that also means is that when we're talking about there need to be no more Amalekites, right? The Amalekites need to be wiped out. That doesn't necessarily mean on the material level, every single one of them needs to be murdered, right? What it means is these practices that make one an Amalekite, the rituals, the practices, those have to be stopped. Right? So it was possible for actual humans within those groups to no longer be Amalekites. All they had to do was participate in the initiation rituals and the rituals of another people group.
And I think that's huge. I think that is some awesome context there from Father Stephen DeYoung. And again, check out the Gospel Simplicity podcast. I think this is great. And there's if you're interested in the Nephilim question and the giants that Israel encountered as they set forth to sort of conquer the promised land, I think that again is a big picture of what's actually going on. There's a spiritual battle being fought by the people of God, the human people of God, and there are forces of good and evil. That's what the Bible portrays. It's that there is way more going on than what is happening in the material. But Alex O'Connor, and if you were just a physicalist or a materialist or an atheist, you're gonna miss the point of what's going on. And so it seems like, oh my gosh, there's just all this injustice that's only going one side. Now, did Israel do everything exactly the way Yahweh wanted? No, like they messed up. That's the story of the Old Testament. It's the people of God falling into disobedience and God rescuing them time and time again. And then he brings the Messiah. And so thanks be to God for that. But you can look, there's the Nephilim were in this land, and I did a series of videos on that, and I can leave some of the links in the description of this video if you're curious about going down that rabbit hole. But again, it's evil. It is good versus evil. Now, are the good people of God perfect? No, they fall apart. But the evil people are ritualistically practicing the evil, which means they're in harmony with that evil, which means even given the choice to be rescued out of that evil and come into harmony with the people of God, they chose to continue the practices of these evil pagan, Nephilim and the, society that sort of followed those practices. And so big picture context from Stephen DeYoung, I thought it was really good to, again, sort of show in a way, like I feel like William Lane Craig is a great philosopher, a great Christian apologist. And yet we have so much modernity sort of wrapped in our Christianity that we forget, like, hey, there's a spiritual war going on, and we can't just say that. Is it that Israel just went in and murdered a bunch of innocent people? No, it doesn't look that way. It looks like God, at least, offered peace, gave people a chance. He was very specific about wiping out these practices so that those evil practices would no longer exist on earth. And again, it's like giving us a choice. We could follow God and live in harmony with God, or follow after these evil practices. And yet there's this scene with Jesus and this Canaanite woman that is fascinating here within the conversation. And shout out to my friends on Twitter, because I didn't actually know about that video with Father Stephen DeYoung. Great video. And just even the conversation going on X, I guess. I dead named Twitter. I dead named X a second ago and called it Twitter. The conversation going on over there is a good one. So you can follow me and others there. This Canaanite woman. So again, what makes a person a Canaanite? What makes a person a Hebrew? What makes a person part of the people of God or part of the enemies of God? She began to cry out, saying, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is cruelly demon-possessed." But he did not answer her a word, and his disciples came and implored him, saying, "Send her away, because she keeps shouting at us." But he answered and said, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But she came and began to bow down before him, saying, "Lord, help me." Interesting. And some people won't like Jesus' response here. And he answered and said, "It's not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." Oh, Jesus calls this woman a dog. Like, it's an uncomfortable passage for me. I'll admit that. He's using an allegory. He's using sort of a parable there. Are dogs part of the family? Yeah. Is he, but of course, culturally and contextually, that's not a nice thing to say. So I don't know. Maybe I don't know what to do with that passage. But listen, hang in there with Jesus, particularly if you're an atheist and you're coming here and you're listening to Alex O'Connor and you're thinking, gosh, yeah, these are the reasons why I really don't like the Bible or whatever. Do the hard work to look into it. And I always think, like, is the problem here in the text or is it in myself? And I have to wrestle through that. But she said, "Yes, Lord. But even dogs feed on the crumbs which fall from their master's table." And that right there is a fascinating statement from a Canaanite woman. Because the nation of Israel was meant to go into the promised land and be a light to the Gentile nations, these nations in and around the region. And she acknowledges that. We were supposed to feed from the crumbs that fell off the table of the nation of Israel. We were supposed to, just like Father Stephen DeYoung says, we were supposed to be brought in. We were supposed to abandon our pagan practices and save the lives of our children and our innocent from the hands of being sacrificed to Baal and all that. We were supposed to come into the nation of Israel. Then Jesus said to her, "O woman, she's been transformed. Is it good?" This is a question. it is a statement. It's not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. Oh, woman, your faith is great. She's not a dog. She's a woman of great faith. It shall be done for you as you wish. And her daughter was healed at once. So does Jesus look at this Canaanite woman and say, hey, we were supposed to annihilate you. There was supposed to be a pure genocide. There was supposed to be a complete annihilation of these Canaanite clans. What are you doing here? Peter's got a sword. Why didn't he just tell Peter to finish the job there? Because that's not the point. The point is there's something far greater going on, that this Canaanite woman can go to the feet of Jesus, bow before him, call him Lord, acknowledge that she could be, even as a Gentile, brought into the people of God to feed off of the table. And Jesus says, woman, your faith is great. It shall be done. And he heals her daughter. He heals the daughter. That's what Jesus did with the Canaanite woman who came and bowed before him. So before we hurl accusations at the Bible for its immorality, which I thought was really funny about this conversation, that Alex seems like he's on the moral high ground and William Lane Craig is caught trying to defend genocide, which I don't think, as I read the passage, it's not even a genocide, because again, we could go back and say, do not leave alive anything that breathes. Is he talking about every single innocent child and woman in the city? Or is he talking about the people who have not made peace? He's talking about the people who have, like in Sodom, the evil practices are so ingrained in them that this is how God has decided to man. That these people have the evil so ingrained in them that this is God's justice. This is God's righteousness. And again, there's a challenge here again, and maybe I have too much modernity in my mind, because I look at that and I go, gosh, but doesn't it seem unjust? Well, I have an imperfect view of justice because I'm a fallen human being. So I must grow in my faith in God to see God for who he is, that he is loving and just and merciful. And though it is still confusing to me, though I've done 3 videos on this passage now, I'm going to wrestle with it. I'm going to continue to wrestle with it. I'm glad you're here with me wrestling with it. God takes the breath, the spirit that is residing in these cities, and judges it and removes it from the face of the earth because of its corruption, and doesn't want the people of God to be corrupted with that corruption that flows from a spiritual war that's going on, that has legitimate consequences for this world. And God, in his compassion, understands those consequences better than I do as a fallen human being, looking at this and saying, well, doesn't this seem unjust? Sure, God's justice seems unjust to people who don't see the world the way God sees the world, which is, and maybe this seems like a cop-out of like, well, just believe in God and it all makes sense. But what other option do I have? Yes, the teachings of Jesus are hard, but they are the words of life. This is what his disciples said when a bunch of people abandoned him. They said, where else will we go? How else do I make sense of this world? If I abandon God, then I'm stuck like Alex. He's using the Bible, and he's talking about it as though it's historically accurate because it's convenient for him to be able to hurl that at God and say, this is why I don't like God. But probably when it comes to the resurrection of Jesus, he'll say, well, the Bible is historically inaccurate. So which one is it? Is the Bible historically inaccurate when it's convenient for you, and it's historically accurate when it's inconvenient? Or maybe it's the other way around. I think I did that in the wrong order. If you want to claim the historical accuracy of this part of the Bible, then I think you have to be confronted with the resurrection of Jesus. If you want to dismiss the resurrection of Jesus, then you have to abandon, as though that's not historical, then don't use this as though it is historical as a pretext for disbelieving in God. Now what are you going to do? You have no God, but you see the injustice in the world. And I think Alex accurately sees the injustice in the world. But now you have no God. And now all you have is humanity. And so that's really where the problem lies. You can't blame God for the evils of humanity if that God doesn't exist. But if you have God, even if that idea of God makes you uncomfortable, is it possible that there is redemption? Is it possible that there's restoration? Is it possible that God is overcoming the injustice in this world? It's possible. It's at least possible. But if there's no God, outside of the resurrection of Jesus Christ, there is no hope for humanity. So Alex, I think you should keep with the historical reliability of this passage. I think you're right to quote it as though it is historically reliable, because it is. This is what happened. Is what happened difficult? Yes. Is it genocide? I'm not sure. Is it war? Most certainly. Is war horrible? Yes. Can God transform the horrible things of this world, like war, and use them for the good? He can. Why? Because this Canaanite woman shows up to the feet of Jesus, calls him Lord. Her daughter is demon-possessed, and she frees her. And I guess I'd rather take that, even if it's just a possibility, over the determinism that comes from a materialistic universe that has no God and has no spirituality. There's no spiritual warfare going on, but then there's also no hope. The Bible tells me that God transforms the dust of the earth and breathes life into humanity. If all we are is dust and there is no life and then there is no spirit, then there is no hope, I think. So, all right. Thanks for being here. I'll catch you in the next one.